I do still very much think that the United States and Europe are on the same team. And I think that this is, sometimes I've been criticized as a hyper-realist, right? I think of foreign policy purely in terms of transactional values. What does the America get out of it? What do the rest of the world get out of it? And try to focus so purely on the transactional value of it that we ignore sometimes the humanitarian or the moral side of it. And I think, at least with Europe, that's actually not a full encapsulation of my views. I think it's completely ridiculous to think that you're ever going to be able to drive a firm wedge between the United States and Europe. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to have disagreements. And of course, you brought up the speech earlier. It doesn't mean that Europeans won't criticize the United States or the United States won't criticize Europe. But I do think fundamentally we have to be, and we are, on the same civilizational team. And I think, obviously, there's a big question about what that means in the 21st century. I think, obviously, the president and I believe that it means a little bit more European burden sharing on the defense side. I think that it means that all of us, frankly, on both sides of the Atlantic have gotten a little bit too comfortable with the security posture of the last 20 years, and that, frankly, that security posture is not adequate to meet the challenges of the next 20 years. Obviously, I think it was the right thing to do for us to start the process of negotiation. I think for too long, the Russians, the Ukrainians have been fighting. Obviously, there's been a lot of people dying on both sides. There's been a lot of innocent loss of life. And our view is it's absurd that you've had this war go on for so long, and the two sides aren't even talking constructively about what would be necessary for them to end the conflict. And I think that, one of the things that President Trump has always been very good at, and he's gotten a lot of criticism, unfair criticism in my view, from both the American and some of the European press, is what I would call a strategic realism or a strategic insight. In other words, you don't have to agree with the Russian justification for the war, and certainly both the president and I have criticized the full-scale invasion, but you have to try to understand where the other side is coming from to end the conflict. And I think that's what President Trump has been very deliberate about, is actually forcing the Russians to say, here is what we would like in order to end the conflict. And again, you don't have to agree with it. You can think that the request is too significant, and certainly the first peace offer that the Russians put on the table, our reaction to it was, you're asking for too much, but this is how negotiations unfold. And I wouldn't say, I'm not yet that pessimistic on this, I wouldn't say that the Russians are uninterested in bringing this thing to a resolution. What I would say is, right now, the Russians are asking for a certain set of requirements, a certain set of concessions in order to end the conflict. We think they're asking for too much, okay? And then obviously, the Ukrainians matter a lot. They're the other side. They're the other party, at least to the direct conflict. And we have to ask, what is the Ukrainian, what do they need in order to bring this conflict to a successful completion?